Well, first off, Billy, I just want to congratulate you. Now a two-time winner of the Hawaii NSMA Sportswriter of the Year. Just want to say congratulations.
Thank you very much. It's definitely an honor.
Well, I first want to talk about your journey into journalism. How did it start for you? It's different for a lot of people, but for you, what was your path to journalism? Why did you first fall in love with it?
Well, my story is going to be a little bit different. So I started out, I grew up, I was born in right near Seattle, Washington in Bellevue. Moved out to Hawaii when I was 6 years old, went to the University of Washington, finished up at UH. And when I came back to UH, the journalism program was being redone or whatever, and I would have had to have waited a year to enter the program.
Hmm.
So I never took a journalism class in college. I graduated from the business school at UH, but at the time I had a part-time job at the newspaper. And it was one of those situations where they had an opening in the sports department, but I had to graduate a semester earlier than I was going to graduate, which meant I had to basically take all my writing intensive classes and the final business class all in the same semester so that I could graduate, so that I could get this job that was opening up with someone retiring. So I entered the journalism field. I started working in a newspaper when I was 19, and I never took a journalism class in college.
Wow. So what led
Yeah,
you to that? Did you like the writing aspect or the sports aspect?
it was all sports. I've always been someone who, growing up, I always knew if it was something that I really enjoyed and liked, I could focus and be good at it. But if it was something I didn't enjoy, then it just wouldn't catch my attention. And it was hard for me to like really work hard in those areas. So I knew I had to do something I enjoyed. And there was nothing I enjoyed more than growing up than sports.
So did you attend the University of Hawaii or no?
Yes. So I finished up at the University of Hawaii my last 2.5 years.
Okay.
And so that took me along to get a business degree. So I went to the business school, got my business degree, and have never used it for anything in my life.
Okay. That's awesome. Well, I mean, a little bit. I'd say you have to use it a little bit with contracts and stuff.
Yeah, maybe. But yeah, I probably could have used that journalism degree a little bit more.
Yeah. So wait, so how'd you end up at the Honolulu Star?
So it was one of those situations where when I came back, like a friend of a friend knew someone who worked at one of the newspapers, and I just basically said, "Hey, I'm interested if you guys have anything." And so they would just, it was, you're a stringer basically. So they'd send me out to like a sailing competition or like a high school baseball game or whatever. And so I did that. And right after I did that, like a part-time position opened up like very last second. Someone just didn't show up for work. So they asked me if I was interested in that. So as I was going to college, I was basically also working part-time at the paper, which kind of became more and more hours. And then I was part of our weekly football coverage on Friday and Saturday nights. And so basically I knew like, okay, this is what I want to do. It's just A, when will a job open? And B,
Mhm.
uh, I needed to get my college degree in order to be able to do that. So it was yeah, it definitely ramped up how quickly I got that college degree.
I know for a lot of people, it's got to be the islands and, the relaxing nature. What made Hawaii appealing specifically for you? Why'd you end up there?
Definitely the relaxing nature, right? So like I love all Seattle sports. I'm a
Mhm.
huge Husky guy. I'm a big Seattle professional
Okay.
sports guy. I love Seattle. My parents live there now. But I just never could leave Hawaii. I left a couple times for like a year. Like I said, I went to college up there for a couple of years, but the idea that I wear jeans maybe, I don't know, 10 times a year in Hawaii.
Yeah.
I go to work. When I go to the office, I'm wearing slippers every day. Everyone's on Hawaiian time. I'm always 10 minutes late to everything. It's just, once I've been a part of this lifestyle, this kind of laid back, chill lifestyle, I go to the mainland and everything seems to be going at a million miles per hour. I'm like, you know what? I can't do this. I like that lazy lifestyle a little bit. So yeah, it's just the culture, the people here, how beautiful it is. If I could make it doing this job, doing what I love to do, and be able to live in a place in Hawaii, I'm going to try to do it.
I mean, that definitely doesn't sound too bad showing up slippers a little bit late. I could use some of that Hawaii time.
Yeah, exactly. I think about like I covered high school football for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And like, being out there in November at these high schools in these like rundown press boxes. And sometimes I'm like, oh, it's a little humid or oh, it's a little rainy. It's like you're not thinking about like on the mainland. It's probably snowing at some of these
Yep.
places. Some of these reporters are just going through all the weather conditions in a, late November playoff matchup or whatever, doing everything they're doing in addition to covering something as tough as high school football. So I feel for everyone out there. I definitely feel lucky.
We even got some snow in South Carolina just a couple weeks ago, which is so it's like it's been crazy.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm just having to put layers on. Like you're already running around trying to get quotes and like you're trying to do that in all these warm weather jackets and everything. Yeah. I can't even imagine how that would be.
Yeah. So you talked a little bit about some of the general culture of Hawaii. Can you talk specifically? I know you mentioned it a little bit before we started talking about the sports culture in Hawaii. Is it a really tight-knit group? What is it like at the high school and college level?
Yeah, it's I get asked that question a lot and I basically tell everyone and I think basically the way to kind of look at it is here in Hawaii, the University of Hawaii, the college school, it's basically the one public school for, there's some other smaller Division II schools, but it's the one major university where um that's kind of like our team. So that's more like our professional team. So I
Hmm.
tell people like for people who live in big cities or whatever that have professional teams, the college here is like our professional team. And then high school sports here is really like college for a lot in a lot of places. And I say that because, for instance, high school football here is huge. Like I know
Hmm.
you hear about like Texas and all those stories and everything, but high school football is really important here. Like when you meet people from Hawaii, they don't ask you what college you went to. They ask you what high school you went to, right? That's like the pride of what you do. And it's like when you go from high school to college, whether you're playing here or whether you're playing anywhere on the mainland, you're always kind of representing Hawaii. And I
Okay.
think that's kind of what's different about here is no matter where you go, your hometown, you're representing the people of Hawaii. Like we're these tiny islands in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, but it's such a close knit group. It's such a they say Ohana is family, right? It's such a Ohana of people who live here that like they know that hey, you can go do your own thing on the mainland or whatever, but when you leave here, you're representing the islands, and I think that's something that's truly unique about living in Hawaii. And I think just in terms of understanding the way kind of we are with sports. And when you see like a Tua Tagovailoa or a Dylan Gabriel right now, and you're always like, wow, they're always really representing Hawaii, even though they're going to Alabama, they're going to Oregon. That's just because of the upbringing here and the pride you take in knowing that you're coming from a place like Hawaii and you represent the people here in the islands here.
Yeah, you're definitely right. You see a lot of that because it's different when you see another player come from Texas or wherever in the mainland and you see they represent their hometown, they like to show it off, but it's not nearly as much. You know when someone is from Hawaii, and they let you know as well, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So that I think that's something that really makes things very special. Can you hear the background?
I can hear a little bit now.
Yeah, now
I
we've
can
got the
hear a
whole
little.
flash flood warning going off.
Oh yeah, I'm sure the
Yeah.
rain in there has got to be crazy when it does.
It does. It can get crazy here, but as I tell everyone, there's a huge difference. The rain here, it's like the ocean. It's kind of warm, so I
Uh-huh.
can't complain about it too much.
I heard you mention a little bit about, I heard Dylan Gabriel, Tua Tagovailoa. Can you talk a little bit about what it's been like covering some of those players who have who have gone on to become, big time stars that started out in Hawaii?
Yeah. It's funny. We just so they just had the Polynesian Bowl.
Hmm.
I think what was it 2 weeks ago, and it's one of the high school all-star games. I
Okay.
think it was broadcast on NFL Network where they bring like all the as many top players in the country as you can here. And so it was broadcast on NFL Network. And I also do a radio show, and we
Mhm.
interviewed Manti
Saw that.
Te'o. Yeah, and we interviewed Manti Te'o, who um, kind of had his ordeal at Notre Dame, and he's kind of getting back into the spotlight, doing some broadcasting and stuff, and which has been really cool to see. But in talking to him, it took me back to when I first really got full time covering high school sports. It was right around Manti Te'o's time, and
Hmm.
he really was like the first guy I would say. And there were guys that came before him, but in this new social media age, or at the
Yeah.
beginning of social media, where he was like basically regarded as the number one recruit in the country in some areas. And so he was like this superstar local high school player who ends up going to Notre Dame, who like all of a sudden was had all these different schools, all these major schools coming to visit him on campus at Punahou. And it really kind of began this like I want to say transition into Hawaii suddenly has become a pretty popular place for college coaches to come recruit. Like I remember when we had Lane Kiffin was the offensive coordinator at Alabama, and he was out
Uh-huh.
here and it was like, oh my goodness, Lane Kiffin's here. Like, oh wow, it's Lane Kiffin. And now we get so many coaches out here today that it's just kind of a normal thing where,
Hmm.
Manti was really the guy that started this run of really, really excellent players that have come out of the islands. I mean, you've got just at the quarterback position alone, right? Like we mentioned,
Yeah.
you have Mariota, Tua, you have Dylan Gabriel, you have
Yep.
guys like DeForest Buckner in the NFL that are doing his thing. So there's just now Hawaii's become just such a place where there's so much talent that's being seen, and it's become such a recruiting hotbed. And I think it's another thing of just like from when I first started in the mid 2000s to where it is now, it's a totally different game. It's normal to see basically any school in the country. You know, Georgia now
Yeah.
recruiting guys out here. We have Jaron Calve Sangapolutele, one of the best high school seniors that was a five-star recruit who went to Oregon. Now he's going to Cal and had his whole thing. But yeah, it's amazing the amount of talent that comes out of Hawaii now that gets seen and then actually does well at the next level.
And there's certainly been a lot since you've been there as a reporter as well and a writer. What is that like? It's got to be pretty cool as a writer in covering all those players in Hawaii because I feel like you would have, maybe more access than other places where there's so many people that are trying to get access and so many players coming out. Whereas Hawaii, it's a little bit more of a closer group. Would you say that's the case?
Oh, 100%. I mean, you go, and that's the one thing now where in my role now at the newspaper, I'm basically strictly University of Hawaii athletics, but I
Okay.
really miss covering high school athletics, especially high school football, because, you see, like I remember seeing Tua for the first time, and it was his first game as a sophomore at St. Louis.
Uh-huh.
And I'd heard about him, saw him play, and I was just like, oh my goodness, this guy's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Well, like I wrote kind of one story about him, just talking about how good he was. And next thing I know, I had his mom reached out to me at the time. I'd go to games and I'd see his whole family, and they'd come over and talk to you and
Wow.
be so appreciative of the job you were done and anything you need. I remember we had a fellow reporter with me went to church with him one
Wow.
Sunday just to kind of see him go through all of that. Like it's part of that Ohana thing here again. It's a big family, and we're all family, and they kind of open you up, especially at such a young age, and allow you to kind of come in and really. Sometimes I'm like I kind of feel a little bit uncomfortable. It's like I don't want to, these are like high school kids. I don't want to be like I'm a media guy. I don't need to be bothering them all the time. But
Mhm.
that's one thing I've had to get used to here in Hawaii is like everyone is just completely open with you. You very rarely find that family that doesn't want to just kind of, bring you in and show you
Mhm.
around and tell you their whole story and, give you spam musubis before games in the press box or whatever. So it's a totally different culture out here.
And you kind of mentioned a little bit of it, but I was going to ask, what is the access like with your role? And what are some of the things that you do, and what kind of access do you have with the players that you report on?
So it's kind of changed a little bit for me now. So I'm
Yeah.
now basically primarily a University of Hawaii writer. I cover, men's volleyball. Volleyball is a huge thing in Hawaii, and I think this might surprise some people that, I'm still working in a newspaper where I covered the college women's volleyball team last year, and they had a tournament in the middle of the year, or they just played in Texas.
Hmm.
They played Baylor and Texas in Texas, and the paper actually sent me in 2024, paid and everything to go see them play in Texas and Baylor. And I remember going to the Texas match, and the guy that was working there for the local paper was just like, "We haven't seen a person from a newspaper coming to cover, women's volleyball in college and forever, and plus you're flying all the way out from Hawaii."
Yeah.
And so it kind of just shows that like, at least here in the island still, it's still a very big deal, college athletics and specifically covering, volleyball. So, I cover both men's and women's volleyball teams. I cover the women's basketball team. I co-cover kind of football. We kind of split football up a little bit, but yeah, my job primarily now is just, covering all the college teams. And like I said, with the amount of coverage they get in our newspaper, it's basically like the equivalent, I'd say, of somebody covering a professional team
Okay.
in bigger cities on the mainland.
And wasn't Texas the national champions in volleyball?
They were the two-time defending national champs. That's
Okay.
part of the reason we went. They also had three players on their roster, a roster of what, like 18 kids maybe
Uh-huh.
from Hawaii.
Oh,
So,
wow.
yeah, so you talk about, all the football players from Hawaii. Well, the two-time defending national champs have three players from their roster in Texas
Hmm.
from Hawaii. So that tells you a little bit of
Yeah.
it's not just football. It's a lot of different sports over here where Hawaii produces a lot of talent.
So you clearly cover a whole bunch of different sports. Do you have one? I know you've mentioned volleyball and football a lot. Do you have a sport that's your favorite to cover?
Well, it was always football, I do have to admit, but I just last year started covering this men's volleyball team for the first time.
Mhm.
And so Hawaii, they went to the national final 4 years in a row from
Wow.
They won back-to-back national championships in 2021, 2022. Um, they're really good, and there's like this group of like upper echelon top teams in men's collegiate volleyball. You've got like Long Beach State, UCLA, UC Irvine, and right now that's kind of been it's the hot ticket in town right now. I mean, the
Mhm.
last home game, I want to say it was like 6,000 people went to go see it. So it's a lot of fun. It's kind of the big show in town right now in the winter and the spring, and it's pretty impressive what these guys do because their setter is 6'11". They've got a bunch of guys 6'10". I mean, they're just these huge, monstrous guys that are playing volleyball at such a high level. A lot of guys with professional experience, like a professional team experience going up, like United States under 17 teams and all that, teams from other countries and stuff. So I've really gotten into men's volleyball these last 2 years.
What would you say some of the biggest differences are between covering sports in Hawaii versus, at a university or a place on the mainland?
Ooh, good question. I would say I think it's just that level of that level of pride, that thing of like I said, when you're from Hawaii, and especially when then you go and play at the University of Hawaii
Hmm.
and how you're representing these islands and you're also representing this fan base, and especially like I said in the sport of volleyball, which volleyball is so huge here. Um, it's such a close-knit community that I think you just kind of get this real feeling of like um togetherness or whatever. And it's kind of weird because like right be one-sided with the home team or whatever like that. You're doing a fair and balanced job, but you always kind of understand the who you're writing for and where you're coming from, and you just kind of always understand that there are a lot of people that read these stories every day that take a lot of pride in the teams that they are watching and they are covering. And we've got here with the TV contract. Every women's basketball game is on TV. Every men's volleyball, women's volleyball game is on TV. So people are watching it every Friday and Saturday night. Volleyball gets 4, 5, 6,000. If it's a big men's volleyball game, they'll sell out the arena of 10,000 people. And so just like being on such a small island and yet having so many people into what you're doing, I think it's all kind of part of what makes Hawaii so unique.
And that's really cool, especially because I'm originally from North Carolina where it's all about rivalries. You grow up, you're either a UNC fan or you're a Duke fan. You have NC State, you have App State, some of those other schools, but it's Duke or UNC. And so it's interesting to hear about, especially Hawaii, where it's really just one main university. Would you say that the majority of people are, even if they haven't attended, they're University of Hawaii fans?
Yeah, yeah, I think there's no question about it. And the other thing that's funny is I'd mentioned the Polynesian Bowl earlier, and so you had top players from like rival schools like a Kahuku and a St. Louis, longtime high school rivals. But the thing about here, it's like when that senior season is over, like for instance, our big rivalry in football is Kahuku St. Louis in high school, and they
Yeah.
played for the championship this year. You know, all year long, big rivalry. But the moment that game's over and guys from each team saw each other at the Polynesian Bowl, you know that once high school is over, you guys are all together again. And there's some kind of special thing about these kids that are rivals in high school that just the moment that season's over, it's like something clicks and they just go from being rivals to being like family friends and the best of friends or whatever because they know now moving forward they will always be together representing the state of Hawaii.
I would say, at least from an outsider's perspective, that's probably one of the main reasons why some of these Hawaiian athletes find so much success. I think because of the upbringing, the culture, a lot of those values, I feel like they're able to carry really well and, be leaders to some people who may not have that same experience.
Yeah, totally being a leader in the community. And also, I think it gives them kind of a chip on their shoulder, right? When you leave
Yeah.
the island, you go to this big, giant continental US to all these giant schools, and that yet you still got to remember you're from these tinier, smaller places, smaller
Yeah.
schools in this tiny little group of islands in the Pacific Ocean. That I think you just naturally have a chip on your shoulder of like always trying to be the best. It's very competitive here growing up. But then I think when you have that added responsibility of like, I'm representing like my family, I'm representing my state, I think that allows you and gives you this extra motivation, whatever you want to call it, to be able to succeed at the next level and maybe sometimes not fall into maybe some of the pitfalls that other athletes might do.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm also interested to hear about, specifically with the travel. I know you mentioned about when you went to Texas with Hawaii being off the coast and having to go back and forth to the mainland. What's that travel like for the athletics and then also for you?
Well, it's a great time to ask that question because if you look at the landscape of college athletics and you're now
Yep.
seeing these West Coast schools having to go play on the East Coast, and you're now
Hmm.
hearing some of these coaches complain about, like, I think it was Mick Cronin at UCLA the other week was talking
Yep.
about how, like, man, we've had to go over there. It's not like they're coming to here where it's all warm or whatever. We've had to go out there where it's freezing. And let me just tell you, everyone in Hawaii, we're just laughing at all that because this team's got to go from what is it? It's basically a 5 hour, 5.5 hour trip to the West Coast.
Yeah.
And a lot of these schools, like playing in the Big West, it's basically what they do. It's a rotation for 10 weeks or whatever of it's 2 games at home 1 week, 2 games on the road next week. So every other week is a 5.5 hour flight back and forth to the West Coast. And
Jeez.
then you get in a situation where they're competing in the NCAA tournament, or like, I just UH won the national championship. They had to go to Columbus, Ohio, the last time they played BYU to win, and just everything that comes with that. And then also getting the fans, like, it's also a pretty big ordeal for family and friends to be able who want to, see their kids play or see their nephews play or whatever it might be to go out there and travel. You'd be surprised at still how many people are somehow able to pull it off and make all these trips because there's always wherever Hawaii goes, not just the West Coast and playing in these Big West games, but wherever they go, you will always notice there is a good amount of Hawaii fans that travel with the tea leaves and everything. And it's always kind of amazed me, as hard as it is, as hard as the logistics are, that somehow, some way, these fans find a way to get to wherever they need to go.
I think, yeah, you're right about that. It was crazy seeing, like, especially I know one of the biggest examples is when Miami traveled to play Cal for that big college game day game. And meanwhile, Hawaii's like, we've been doing this, you know?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. We don't want to hear your complaints, Mick Cronin.
Yeah.
Like, we do this every other week, all right? And trust me, the weather is usually a lot worse where we're going than where
Uh-huh.
we're from.
I'm interested to also hear about how that's going to change because I know that Hawaii is now joining the Mountain West, as a full-time member in 2026, correct?
Yes.
How do you
Yes.
think it'll change your travel and everything with the team then?
Yeah, it'll be a noticeable difference. One of the Big West Conference has been a very good conference to the University of Hawaii. It's
Uh-huh.
basically you fly into California, you kind of keep the 2 match road trips and schools fairly close to each other. And so it's a simple, basically one flight over there, and then maybe sometimes it's a longer bus ride or whatever, but that's it. This is going to be I mean, there's going to be multiple flights to get to a lot of different places, going to, New Mexico and El Paso and all these different spots. So there's no doubt that there will be more of a travel. Travel will be a lot different. It will not be as. I mean, I say it's easy. People on the
Yeah.
outside might think it's not easy, but it'll definitely not be what it was, and it'll definitely be a bigger deal that'll take some getting used to.
Do you travel with the team on most of those trips?
I do not. I
Okay.
basically we kind of pick out like if there's some really big matches in the
Okay.
regular season, and then basically any postseason tournament. So for instance, the women's volleyball team, they played in the Big West Championships in California. So I traveled to California for that. They've won it the last 2 years that I've covered the team. So then I've stayed with the team and then gone to the NCAA tournament, which has happened to be in Oregon both years. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, we'll go with them on all like the postseason tournaments and stuff like that. And then like say you're playing a Texas and women's volleyball that has
Yeah.
those Hawaii ties, then we'll go cover that.
Okay. I also want to hear about how is it from your perspective of when away teams come to Hawaii? Obviously, there's the time difference. How is their mindset when they come in? What do you notice? Do they treat it like it's a vacation? Are they surprised? What do you usually see?
Well, I think the teams that they're used to coming out here every year have kind of done a good job of figuring out that it's a business trip.
Okay.
Generally, some there's different kind of situations. I know one thing, for instance, say is Hawaii's actually had some success, and that there's been a few years when they've had the Maui Invitational on
Uh-huh.
Maui, and usually that's a lot of premier programs go over there
Yep.
every year. Every once in a while, Hawaii is able to pick off one of those teams that maybe come to Oahu and play
Hmm.
like Friday or Saturday before the tournament, which always starts the Monday of Thanksgiving week over there. And that's turned into something where North Carolina did it this year.
Mm.
It's the first time anyone's done that for a while because there was this propensity that Hawaii was able to pull off a couple of upsets because teams were already gearing for playing in Maui. They
Yep.
make the long flight and you're trying to fit this one game in, and a lot of times they wouldn't play very well. So there's been some situations like I point to the baseball team for a long time.
Hmm.
They would schedule at the start of the year, and which is is mid-February now. They
Yep.
would try to bring in the most powerhouse teams they could because those teams have been practicing indoors in the
Yep.
winter. They barely had a chance to get outside, and then it was they'd come over here and play in Hawaii to start the year, the first couple of weeks of the year. And Hawaii's been practicing outdoor all the time,
Yep.
used to everything or whatever. And it always like a lot of teams would leave here like, oh no, maybe we shouldn't do that because it was such an advantage for UH in some of those spots.
I can imagine, especially with baseball, where there's a lot more, there's obviously the gap in between baseball teams, but any team can win on any given day for that. So I can definitely see how that would lead to some potential upsets as well.
Yeah, and there's only so much you can do practicing indoors to get ready for playing outdoors or whatever in the summer months. Baseball's a summer game, so it always cracked me up sometimes that there were teams that were, you know, they'd play say like a University of Washington or a team from like the Pacific Northwest or anywhere where
Uh-huh.
it's cold. Like it was just like, man, we forget just practicing outside. We barely even go outside right now. And
Yeah.
now we're going to play four competitive Division I
Yeah.
NCAA baseball games out there at Les Murakami Stadium in front of 4,000 people. Yeah, it was always quite an advantage for the home team.
What's the recruiting like? I'd imagine there's a lot of homegrown talent on a lot of these teams, but for people that are coming from the mainland, what's that recruiting like? Do you use tournaments like the Maui, especially in the transfer portal era, to try and, bring in some of those bench players who may not have a spot?
Yeah. Recruiting is
A
it's
doozy?
undergone quite a change. It's undergone quite a change. I think for the most part, I think though that Hawaii did have a little bit of an advantage to obviously being Hawaii and the
Yep.
beaches and everything that kind of comes with that. I think one thing though that we've kind of seen is especially in they joined the Big West in 2012 from the Western Athletic Conference, which was a little more spread out. The Big West, obviously California only, and I think there's been something to recruiting California kids. They get a chance to come out here, but every year they get to go home and play X amount of games that are, where they're from or near where they're from that family can go to. I think that that's something that's helped them a little bit. But really recruiting it really kind of ranges from school to school. There's a lot of different factors going in. And now that you're looking at NIL with the
Yep.
transfer portals and all that stuff, it's definitely changed the game. It's changing things around here for sure. And it's something I think that especially with them now moving conferences again here coming up in 2026.
Uh-huh.
There's a lot of kind of, I think, coaches asking themselves a lot of questions right now about exactly what our recruiting strategy should be moving forward.
What are some of those NIL conversations like, especially with moving up in conferences? What type of approach does Hawaii use now with NIL?
Yeah, well, I mean, Hawaii's got its own financial issues. So
Yep.
there's I would say compared to the other schools that used to want to man, there's not a lot of money to be made out here, to be had out here right now. There are a lot of different things, a lot of different programs are doing to try to at least be able to compete with something.
Okay.
My take right now has kind of been like you're not going to win an arms race with anybody out here in Hawaii. You still have to recruit to what makes Hawaii unique. But I think there's starting to be a little bit more of an understanding of like you got to do something for them, right? I mean, I think a kid to an extent is willing to, and I don't know fully what like the differences in money is. They're not. I mean, obviously Hawaii's not bringing in kids making $1 million or whatever, or any kind of that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think they're just kind of realizing that like okay, we can't compete on a dollar per dollar basis with a lot of these schools, but we can give them the opportunity, as we've always had, to come out to Hawaii and play in a place like here where it's beautiful weather year round, where it's beaches and all that kind of good stuff. But we can at least make them feel like they're worth something and give them something. And
Yeah.
I think that it's been kind of a slow process, but it's getting better. And I think there's some things that are really happening right now that'll maybe allow them to kind of hold on to maybe some of these kids who are looking elsewhere right now because they hear about this great thing. They don't experience it here, but they're hearing about it on the mainland, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh, what's going on out there? But as we've seen with the quarterback for UH this last year, Braden Shager, who
Yep.
almost transferred to BYU. Like sometimes the grass isn't always greener, and the
Mhm.
stories you hear they don't always kind of come to fruition.
That makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned quarterback from Hawaii as well. You were at Hawaii through '06, correct?
Yes.
Okay. So you were there for Colt Brennan. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like as, while you were attending? That was 2006 was his best year, right? Over
Uh,
5,000 yards, 50 touchdowns.
yeah, and then he played in the Sugar Bowl. So yeah, I'm getting the year right. So 2006. So I started, so that was, I got my degree in June of '06.
Okay.
I started full time August 1st, 2006. And so my first experience was the team that went to the Sugar Bowl. And I
Yeah.
remember my boss at the time telling me, Bubba, what was I at the time? 20, 23 years old. And he goes, Bubba, it'll never be this good again. You'll never experience anything like this again, which is a weird thing to say to someone in his first year
Yeah.
full time at the newspaper, but he's probably right. I mean, they were like a rock. I mean, they were like a rock band. They were rock stars here. I mean, the autograph lines were
Wow.
just always at the events they did would seem like they would never end. And a guy like Cole Brennan was always the guy that stayed there until the last autograph got signed. He never left early. He was just the ultimate, let me know what you need. Like when he came back, it was just such a huge moment for the university because he was just such a, I mean, he was such a star. And so, I mean, he really was like who can I compare it to? I'm not sure I can compare it to anyone. He was just a star.
Yeah.
He was the king of the islands. You know, he ran the place. And that run through an undefeated season, seeing the Aloha Stadium, which, you know, has been condemned. It's still standing there out there, but it hasn't.
Massive, massive stadium.
Massive stadium, 50,000 people, and it's still sitting there, even though it hasn't hosted anything in 5 years. That place was full. They had some memorable games. That was a year where they had multiple games come down to the last minutes.
Yep.
Uh, I even got to travel, you know, as a 23-year-old first year guy in a sports department with, you know, what do we have at the time? Maybe 14 people. Like I got to travel and I remember I got to go to a Nevada game. It was a Friday
Mhm.
night in Nevada. Just the idea that I'm traveling with this college football team that's in the national rankings, that I was in Nevada and it was right after Colt Brennan had this really bad hit he took against Fresno. And
Uh-huh.
there was this whole debate on whether he should do PTI and he like had to skip a day or whatever. And it was like just the fact that like the Hawaii quarterback is going to be the guest on PTI, like all
Yeah.
those kind of things, experiencing it for the first time. There was nothing like it. There's never been anything like it since then. You always wish, you know, for the sake of the university that something happened where it could get back to something like that. But I think, you know, I will always remember my first year at the newspaper, the 2000, the Sugar Bowl season of '06 as just being the year that, yeah, I'll always think of the words my boss said. It'll never be like this again.
That's a pretty big jump start. That's a pretty good first year to have. He
Yeah.
seemed like such a down to earth guy too, and obviously everyone, the hair with the Hawaii on the side of it was really cool.
Right. Well, that's what I'm talking about, right? He
Yeah.
wasn't from here. He didn't grow up here. He came
Yeah.
from the mainland, and yet by the time he was in his third year, he was shaving the Hawaiian Islands
Yeah.
into his hair. Like that's kind of what it is here. Like you just understand when you get here, you quickly realize the sense of importance you have as someone who's not just repping a university, you're repping an entire state. And you know, he was a guy that completely understood that. And if you watched him, you knew that he completely bought into that.
That's awesome. I can only imagine what it was like, like going to those games, especially at that age. That would have been so
Oh,
fun.
man. Yeah. Especially when you're still young and it's like you're trying to separate, all
Yep.
right, I got a job now. I've got to do this job as a journalist from like fan that's just like, oh my
Yeah.
God, it's insane. Like I remember the Mountain West Championship game against Boise State. Like you're just
Uh-huh.
like keep it real, no cheering in the press box, but at the same time, it was like the biggest game in the history of the
Yeah.
University of so it was such a weird thing as a 23-year-old to kind of go through. You learn some lessons really quickly going through that.
I understand that. Sometimes it's definitely hard, as someone who loves sports, but also a sports journalist to kind of toe the line of, okay, like I'm really excited about this as a sports fan versus, okay, I got to still be a journalist and do my job.
Yeah, totally. And that's why I always say like I'm fortunate in that um I'm a big like I'm a University of Washington guy. You know, I'm a
Uh-huh.
big I went to the national championship against Michigan
That was
last
awesome to
year.
see.
Yeah, and you know, I'm a big Seahawks fan, Mariners fan, was a diehard Sonics fan. And so I'm always feel a little bit lucky that like in my job here, I can still kind of do my job as a journalist covering UH, but then on like
Uh-huh.
Sundays, I can still be a fan of like the Seattle Seahawks, you know?
That's cool. And a good time in the beginning of your career as well to cover the Seahawks. I mean, especially in those 12, 13 seasons.
Yeah. Yeah, for
That's really
sure.
cool.
Yeah, a couple of runs of the Super Bowl, although that was the Super Bowl loss of the Patriots remains the
Uh,
most heartbreaking moment in sports fandom of my lifetime.
Marshawn Lynch.
Yeah, I know, I know, I know.
Uh,
I,
So
it hurt.
you won your last NSMA Sportswriter of the Year award in 2015. We're in 2025 now. How has your life and your career changed since then?
Wow, great question. How has my life changed? Well, I mean, I got married,
Mhm.
so
That's
all that
big.
stuff. Yeah, that's pretty big. Yeah, I would just say that I think that's one good thing about this job and why I feel fortunate to have it in a time where, let's not kid ourselves, right? It's a hard time for journalism these days.
Yeah.
It's a hard time for newspapers. A lot of great people, a lot of talented people have lost their jobs. And so I think for me, I just appreciate it a lot more. I think 2015, I was still kind of grinding, trying to, work my way up, trying to like, I still take it very seriously, but I think, as I've learned over the last 10 years, it's like, no, you were pretty lucky. Like
Yeah.
we just had this whole talk about I got to cover the Sugar Bowl team from UH.
Yeah.
And it's like I don't think I really truly appreciated the time just how lucky it was. And especially now, as you've seen so many papers, right? I mean, we were two papers that, in this town until 2010 that went down to one. And just understanding, I think me, going to Texas last year, right, and covering a regular season women's volleyball match that like, no, this is something that not a lot of people get to do. And I think I just really, I still work hard. I still try to make sure that everyone who reads anything I write is entertained by what they read. But I think at the same time, I really do understand and appreciate just how lucky I am.
So it seems like your perspective has changed, but the passion is still there. Would you say that's still the case? The passion is
Yeah.
as strong as ever?
Yeah, still passionate. I still love it. And as long like I said at the beginning, like I've always known I'm the kind of person where I gotta truly love what I do to be, I think, good at it. I've just always been one of those people where whether it was certain subjects in school growing up,
Uh-huh.
like if I liked it, I'd excel at it. If I didn't like it, I would not be good at it. And I always knew for me to kind of enjoy myself, enjoy my life, and be able to do well at something, I had to truly enjoy it. And I still truly enjoy what I do. I still truly enjoy going and talking to coaches every day,
Mhm.
talking to players, sharing their stories for the people of Hawaii. It's a lot of fun.
And so you've always done the writing, but you mentioned a little bit earlier the talk show as well. What year did that come to be? And what is that like doing a talk show?
Yeah. Well, I started, really good friend of mine, had like a midday 1 hour talk show, and he would have
Okay.
like five of us come on every week. So we'd have like our day where we'd come on for an hour. And this started a couple years ago, and it was just kind of this fun thing to do. And then we had the opportunity where he was offered the morning drive talk show on ESPN radio here, 7 to 9 weekday mornings. And he asked me if I wanted to do it with him. We enjoyed doing the show together. And trust me, one of the things I always joke around about is like I've never been a morning person, and part of the
Mhm.
reason I like this job so much is a lot of times you get to sleep in. You have late nights as a writer at these games or whatever, but you do get to sleep in, which has always been kind of
Right.
nice. Yeah. And so we started the show in July last summer,
Okay.
and it's been a complete total lifestyle change, trying to go to sleep early, knowing if I stay, because I'm used to staying up late and all that kind of stuff. And it's been quite the lifestyle change, but it's been a lot of fun. And it's another area where I've also had to, there's been some things this year where like I've had to balance, okay, give your sports radio hot takey opinion. We try to stay away from the hot take stuff, but like giving your kind of opinion on things
Uh-huh.
compared to like, as a journalist, you're always like, all right, let me research this whole thing and get both
Yeah.
sides and all that stuff, and then I'll formulate my opinion. So I still had to do a little bit of like, straddling that line a little bit, but it's been a lot of fun, and we've gotten a lot of good feedback. And just, we've had some days where we've had people just text in and say, that we make their mornings better. And for me, as a writer, I would from time
Yeah.
to time from family members that just were really blown away by something I wrote that, made them really happy. And that's kind of like the extra part about this job is knowing that you've done something that has touched someone else's life in a good way. That's another thing that is a really, really good feeling to have.
That's definitely got to be a fun like switch up or change as well, with all the writing and then get a chance to kind of, switch things up a little bit and do something a little different.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely kind of it is different for sure. Yeah, it's been you're right. It kind of has been just a little bit of a change. It's in the same field sort of ish, but like it's a little different way of doing it. So yeah, it has been a lot of fun. It helps that my buddy Kanoa Leahy is an awesome dude, is just a fun guy to be around and is really kind of taking me under his wing and
Uh-huh.
allowed me to do with him. So I owe a lot to him, who I think has won a few Hawaii Sportscaster of the Year awards
Yep.
from you guys. Yeah. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun for sure.
And I completely understand the, the lifestyle thing. I've covered a lot of baseball myself specifically. So a lot of nights where it's like, the baseball game isn't until 7:30 or 7, so you don't have to be at the park until 2, which is pretty nice. So you're working the later nights, but then you get to sleep in a little bit, don't have to arrive to work until after lunchtime. That's not too bad.
Yep. And I'll tell you, so I spent 9 seasons covering the UH baseball team.
Uh-huh.
Do you have a baseball? Because baseball's crazy, right? It can go extra
Oh
innings,
yeah.
all kind of things can happen. Do you have like a memorable game, crazy game story?
I do. I would say one of my I started off working after my sophomore year. I worked in the Coastal Plain League, which is kind of a collegiate development league for prospects and players looking to transfer. And so that was certainly an experience because, that was my first ever job or internship in the sports world, and we were thrown into it. We didn't have nearly the amount of people that we probably needed to. There was, I think, four interns, and we did everything. I was hired as basically to be the broadcaster and social media person, and I did a whole lot more than that. I was cleaning the stadium. I was doing interviews. There were nights where I stayed until 2 a.m. to bleach and wash the uniforms. So I was doing pretty much everything. But I remember one specific game. It was because games are usually only 7 innings compared to 9. But there was one game where it didn't start until 8, and then there were rain delays, and then it was a 14 inning game. And so I just remember in one of my first few weeks on the job calling a 14 inning game until about it was at least 1 or 1:30 in the morning for this, Coastal Plain League game, which was but the thing is, you love it. When you're doing it and it doesn't even get tired, that's how you know you love it.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. 14 innings. I've got an 18 inning game that was one
Oh
nothing
wow.
that included a power outage at the stadium. So yeah, I know if you've been through the baseball grind and you've done a few seasons, there's always some few crazy, crazy games that always stick in your mind.
Baseball is always fun though because I feel like you get really connected with the team. I feel like a lot of sports, you get that, but especially even if you're working, in a social media or broadcasting role, especially with baseball because there's so many games that you follow, I feel like you get pretty close with all the people in that organization.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you, and covering just kind of thinking about it for baseball is like you'd show up to practice and they'd be out there early and there's like a lot of downtime sometimes.
Mhm.
So they'd be at the field early, not necessarily you think about like volleyball or basketball, these like
Mhm.
gym sports where it's like they got to get there at a certain time, they change, they get
Yep.
ready to go. Baseball, it's like, stroll out to the field a little early, maybe throw the ball around a little bit, maybe
Yeah.
just the dugout, a few extra sunflower seeds or whatever. And so like they just kind of be chilling a lot of times. And that's like I was always a good time to kind of go up and just kind of talk a little bit. And always in that setting, I always felt like it was a lot more relaxed than like
Mhm.
the one-on-one or like the TV, with all the cameras there that they're kind of answering questions. I always felt it was a lot easier to just kind of simply connect in a more relaxing setting with baseball players.
It seems like that represents Hawaii pretty well then, that kind of
Yeah.
relaxed nature.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just hanging out in February at the Les Murakami Stadium, and it's 80 degrees outside and
Oh yeah.
sunny and chilling. Yeah, yeah,
Do
for
you
sure.
have a favorite over the course of your career, a favorite memory or maybe a favorite story or piece that you've done, one that stands out that you're really proud of?
Oh man, favorite story that I've done. Yeah, there's a few. I would say one of the cool projects we did one time at the Star Bulletin. So this was back in like 2009, I want to say.
Okay.
It was the Centurions. We celebrated the University of Hawaii football team, and we did a top 100 countdown
Huh.
of the best players all time at the University of Hawaii, and I happened to do one on Chad Owens, who was this kind of small local guy. He joined the team as a walk-on and then became this like star. His nickname was Mighty Mouse. He was this guy that
Okay.
go back on special teams, and he played in the NFL briefly, and he won a Grey Cup in Canada.
Huh.
Um, yeah, he was a really, really, really good receiver, but he was just one of these guys who was like, one of the smallest guys you'd see, but was one of the most electrifying punt returners, kick returners, receivers you'd ever seen. And I remember just kind of doing his Centurion story, his top 10 story, and just I went back and I was just watching all of his college highlights, and it was just I remember punt return after punt return for touchdowns, and I just kind of always remember that story because like I always and one thing about Hawaii is you cheer for the underdog, you cheer for like the undersized guy, and his story about being a walk-on. The coaching staff had been there to recruit his quarterback, and so he was just a guy out there running passes. And so to like see that come full circle where he's the guy that ends up making it to the NFL briefly, makes it
Yeah.
to Canada, like I just those kind of underdog stories I really enjoy.
That's awesome. And those are the type of guys that you root for.
Yeah, 100%. Right. Totally. He ended up doing like an MMA fight here once, I remember
Uh-huh.
covering. So yeah, he's a pretty interesting guy. But yeah, I always remember that. So I was always proud of that story that I wrote.
You cover a bit of MMA yourself, correct?
I do. Yeah,
What's that like?
yeah, it's man, there's nothing like it. So back in, so right around the time I started, in addition to the Sugar Bowl season
Uh-huh.
happening, there was this period of time before the UFC became mainstream where mixed martial arts was still this kind of underground type event. But in Hawaii, where fighting was obviously big, they had this period of time where they would get a lot of the best guys to come over here for these. They would call it Super Brawl. It eventually became Icon Sport. There was BJ Penn had this Rumble on the Rock promotion the family did, but they were selling out the Blaisdell Arena, which was 8,000 seats. And
Wow.
so I knew nothing about the sport, and I went. There was this big event that happened right before I got hired. A guy won a championship. He knocked a guy out, and so they're like, "Hey, Billy, we just hired you. Go check out what this MMA thing is." I was like, "Okay, whatever." And I remember the first fight, the main event was this guy Tank Abbott against Wesley Cabbage Correa. These two
Okay.
like banger heavyweight dudes.
Yep.
Huge knockout at the end. And I was like, man, these guys are crazy. This is the craziest thing I've ever seen. And then it kind of became this huge, like mainstream sport. Like all of a sudden, two guys fighting in a cage in the UFC was like
Mhm.
this giant thing that we all celebrate today. Like people today don't realize that this thing wasn't regulated anywhere 20 years ago. You know,
Yep.
it was like a huge thing just to get the sport of MMA and the UFC like an actual mainstream thing. And because of it, guys like BJ Penn and then Max Holloway, I've been able to cover them extensively and cover a lot of their fights. So let's see, I've been to Vegas now, well, I don't know, 5 or 6 times maybe for fights.
That's sick.
I went to Boston one time to see BJ Penn fight Frankie Edgar, and
Ah,
James Toney was on that card, the
wow.
boxer guy
Yeah.
trying to fight Randy Couture. It was a terrible fight, but it was like I was in Boston covering MMA, covered a fight in Seattle, a BJ Penn fight up there. So yeah, covering UFC has taken me to a lot of places, but mostly Vegas and just 2009, BJ Penn fought George St. Pierre. It was the second time, and this was really right where it was becoming mainstream. So it was one of the first times ESPN was there and did like kind of a broadcast from there, like a pregame broadcast or whatever. And I just remember the walkouts for that fight. I've never felt anything like it at a sporting event. It's the most intense, anticipatory, just like unbelievable feeling you could ever feel. Is like right before a major prize fight. I always say that's probably the coolest thing I've ever covered.
That's awesome. You know, as I haven't been to a UFC fight, but that's something I've always really wanted to go to because you're totally right. You can feel even on the screen the energy, especially when they're doing the walkouts, the anticipation. I'm sure that's going to be awesome to be in the arena, especially, with homegrown people like Holloway and, that you get to represent and cover.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you have a um, Max Holloway always comes out to this Hawaiian kickboxer song that's like famous, and BJ Penn always came out to this Israel Kamaka Viva Ole song, and it's just like every time you hear it, you just the chicken skin just kind of gets all over you, and it's like also like you just know you're about to watch two dudes like step into a
Yep.
cage and fight. Like no matter how much you see it on TV, like when you really think about it, it's still like crazy. Like I always think
Yep.
there's a little bit of craziness to these guys that actually go out
Yeah.
there and do it, and so just knowing that that's about to happen, it's a feeling that you really I don't think you can get covering any other sport.
hmm It's definitely a unique sport. There's really nothing like it, especially, just the intimacy of it as well. It's just a one-on-one, it's not teams. It's just two guys, giving it their all.
Yeah, definitely. And so, back, the first few years I covered here, before it became mainstream and people
Uh,
realized that I could pay all this money to go to the local Blaisdell Arena, I could watch it on TV. People would come down there just so they could see fights. And man, there's all kinds of stories. I mean, we had aunties jumping into the ring after fights,
uh,
trying to get the opponent that just knocked out who they're related. I mean, there's so many different things that have happened in Hawaii over the years. But yeah, man, it's covering MMA has been a lot of fun.
the final question I have for you is just so, we mentioned about different paths. You came from a path that originally started out with business and eventually got into journalism. But I was wondering what advice you would have for someone who, is kind of coming up in the same spot, who's maybe in high school or at the start of college. What advice would you have for someone that wants to follow and get into the sports journalism world?
Um, appreciate the grind, appreciate any assignment you get. One thing I've learned the last, oh, I don't know, 15 years is we've had some people that kind of want to get into it, but they have their like set, I only want to do this or I only want to do that. Do everything
Mm.
because you learn so many different things from whatever you're at. Any assignment might seem like it might be boring and I don't want to go watch, people kayak for an hour and a half, but you never know the story that you ultimately tell. There's always stories that appear out of nowhere at anything you go to. All you got to do is go find the story. And when you find the story and you tell the story, and you realize that there's so many people out there that have stories to tell and it's never ending. You go anywhere, you can find anything. I anticipate the grind. Go out and do everything you possibly can because it will make you the best you can possibly be at this job.
That's great advice. Well, thank you very much. That's all I have for you. Just want to congratulate you one more time, Billy Hole, and Hawaii Sports Writer of the Year. Two
Yeah,
times
appreciate
now.
it, man. Yeah,